much, which is the resurrection of Jesus. Never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true.
And it seems appropriate to begin by asking you both the question, can science explain everything? Perhaps we could start with you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I'm not a politician, so I'll give you a straight answer. The answer is yes. Of course, it hasn't yet explained everything, but there are no signs that it's going to run up against a brick wall and stop explaining everything. And I think we should, first of all, be clear what we mean by science. And science is basically a method of discovery based on observation. And taking evidence that can be shared publicly and generally. And that is really the core of the scientific method. But it's not the only component of the scientific method that's important, because the ideas that science generates sit in a network of ideas. So ideas might emerge from biology, they might emerge from physics, chemistry, whatever, psychology, and where they overlap, they are mutually supportive. And this is extraordinarily strong evidence for the appropriateness of science as a means of discovering the truth about the fabric of reality, and indeed all there is. The second part of these introductory comments that I'd like to make is that we have to think about what we mean by the questions that science approaches. And I think there are two classes of question. One is stupid questions, and the other is real questions. And a lot of the stupid questions, maybe that's too strong a term, a lot of class one, let me call it, questions have emerged as extrapolations of human angst, worries about the nature of the world, projections of human ideas where they are not supported by any evidence. Science deals with real questions. Science deals with questions for which there is evidence. So, whereas a typical religious question might be, what is the purpose of the universe? Science can dismiss that as an irrelevant question. There is no evidence that there is any purpose in the universe. In fact, I think it rather wonderful that this extraordinary collection of galaxies is just hanging there, totally without any purpose whatsoever. I think that's rather grand, frankly, and rather inspiring. So when you ask questions for which there is no evidence, such as that one, what is the purpose of the universe, what is the nature of the afterlife, and all that sort of thing, science need not trouble to try to answer them because they're nonsense questions. Science deals with real questions, questions for which there is evidence. And some of these are very deep, and let's not hide them under a bushel. I think one major question is, why is there something rather than nothing? It certainly seems as though there is something, and we presume that before there was something, there was nothing. So it seems to be a real question, and science has as its objective an attempt to answer that kind of question. Another deep question, of course, is the nature of consciousness and all the attributes of consciousness. We appear to have consciousness. There is evidence that we do. And so it is appropriate for science to tackle that. And by consciousness, I mean all the attributes of consciousness, including morality. And so those are real questions. Those are the questions that science can answer. And there is no doubt in my mind that over the past, let's say 300 years, that science has done its job seriously. That is, collecting evidence, setting it in a network of concepts, and seeing the way that they are mutually supportive. I think there's no doubt that over 300 years we have made extraordinary progress, and there is no reason other than pessimism to expect that science will grind to a halt and not answer all the real great questions of existence.
Thank you very much.
Peter Atkins argues that science is the best way to understand reality, and he's right. Just look at the evidence. For centuries, religion claimed diseases were caused by sin or demons. Science replaced that with germ theory and saved millions of lives. The same goes for natural disasters. Christianity once said earthquakes were God's punishment. Science showed us they're caused by tectonic shifts, predictable, measurable, and completely natural. When Atkins says science answers real questions, he's referring to questions with evidence. That's how we know atoms exist, how evolution works, and how we can build a spacecraft to land on a comet. Religion offers stories. Science offers proof. Even big philosophical questions like why there is something rather than nothing are being explored through physics. Theories like quantum fluctuations and vacuum energy suggest that something can arise spontaneously without a divine creator. Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, explains this in detail, backed by cosmological models and quantum mechanics, not scripture.
Very much. So an emphatic yes to the idea that in principle science can explain everything that's worth explaining in that sense. So John, same question to you. Can science explain everything?
Well, obviously not. Brexit, for example. That's a comical response, but I have actually two more answers to the question. You're going to be surprised at how much I agree with Peter, because the definition of science he offered us, that is collecting evidence, making observations, in fact in his book on being, he reduces it beautifully to making observations and comparing notes. If that's what we mean by science, and it's the old meaning of science before the 19th century, then of course science can explain everything, because the very word explanation means making evidence-based observations and notes. So my short answer is, if we accept Peter's first definition, then I agree with him entirely. Science, by definition, explains everything. But of course, the meaning of the word science has changed in England, but not on the continent. In German, Wissenschaft covers the humanities and the natural sciences. And when people these days say science can explain everything, they're not referring simply to making observations and comparing notes at all. For instance, that would apply to any historical or forensic examination. And my faith as a Christian is based precisely on the kind of scientific reasoning that Peter has set forward to us. The main issue, I think, in discussion today is not whether that kind of evidence-based thinking and observation can come to every conclusion. Let me just say, by the way, that from the Christian perspective, Luke, the writer of the third gospel, tells us that that is exactly what his method was. He consulted people, he made observations, and then he put them together. So we'll call that science one. What is, of course, at stake today is the question, can the natural sciences answer every question? And there I think that that is simply not the case. The Nobel Prize winner Peter Medawar, many years ago, he wrote a very interesting book on the limits of science. And he said, we do science a disservice, natural science, if we think it can address any questions. And every question. And he referred to the basic questions of Karl Popper, the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? Natural science doesn't answer questions like that. And Medawar added it is to religion, philosophy, and so on that we must go to answer those questions. I think science is immensely powerful. It is immensely exciting. And it uncovers a vast amount about our universe. But I have a problem by going too far. I'm a mathematician and I'm rather interested in logic. And you know, if we say that science can explain everything, or science is the only way to truth, as it's often put, well, that is not a statement of science. It's a statement of belief. And so if it's true, it's false. Maybe it's too early in the evening for logic like that, but there's a huge logical problem. So to sum up my position, science is powerful. Its methodologies are extremely important also in the sphere of history, forensic science, and in the sphere of religion. But I'm going to be careful here, because Peter is right very often in his critique of superstition, of mythology and nonsense. And science has helped to clear away some of the nonsensical things that sometimes religious people profess. But what really makes me, in one sense, very much in favor of the Christian faith is that from the very start it claims to be evidence-based. And the central piece of evidence is, of course, as you probably know, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I believe in Peter's methodology. I use it all the time, but somehow he feels that a Christian like me doesn't use that methodology within my own Christian faith. Final point, I think explanation. Can science explain everything? We need to tease out what we mean by the word explanation. For example, the law of gravity doesn't explain gravity. It tells, as Newton realized, it tells us wonderful mathematics that we can calculate the way in which heavy bodies move in relationship to one another. But even when we say science explains, often it doesn't explain comprehensively. And I just want to throw a very simple analogy into this, which I find quite useful. About boiling water. How would you explain boiling water? Well, you can explain it by talking about heat conduction and agitation of molecules of water. You can also say the water is boiling because I'd like a cup of tea. Now, those two explanations are very different. They don't conflict. They complement. One is a scientific explanation, natural scientific, but the other is an explanation in terms of the intention and purposes of an agent. And Peter said quite clearly that science doesn't go in for that kind of purpose, but that doesn't mean that kind of purpose doesn't exist. In fact, people have been enjoying tea for millennia before they knew anything about the theory of heat in physics. So what I want to say is this. The God explanation is different from the science explanation. God no more competes with science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with physics as an explanation of the motor car.
Lennox tries to argue that science can't explain everything by redefining what explanation means. He gives examples like the meaning of life, or why the water's boiling, and claims that because science doesn't address personal intention or purpose, it's incomplete. But this is a category mistake. Science isn't about human preferences, it's about objective reality. Saying, "I want tea," explains your personal motive, not the physical process of boiling water. That's not a failure of science, that's just two different levels of description. One is emotional, one is factual. Lennox also appeals to Peter Medawar's view that science can't answer questions like, why are we here? But those are philosophical, not scientific, because they don't have observable evidence behind them. Asking, why am I here, assumes a purpose that hasn't been demonstrated. Science doesn't answer questions loaded with assumptions. It investigates what is, not what people wish to be true. And as for his claim that Christianity is evidence-based because Luke said he interviewed people, that's not evidence. That's hearsay from a gospel written decades after the events it describes, in a time where oral storytelling was the norm. No physical records, no eyewitnesses that can be verified, no corroboration outside the Christian texts. If someone today wrote a biography of a miracle worker based only on interviews and word of mouth, we wouldn't call that evidence. We'd call it mythology. Then there's the resurrection. Lennox says it's the central piece of evidence, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we don't have it. We have no physical body, no confirmed eyewitness accounts, no contemporary Roman records mentioning a crucifixion that disrupted history. In contrast, scientific discoveries like evolution, gravity, and DNA are supported by physical evidence that can be tested by anyone, anywhere. Even the idea that science is just a belief falls apart. Belief without evidence is faith. Belief built on observation, repeatable testing, and falsifiability, that's science. Saying science can't explain everything is just another way of saying, I want to keep certain answers off limits.
Okay, thank you. Great introductory statements from both of you. I'm sure there's lots you want to respond to there, Peter. Where do you want to begin?
Well, there's so much nonsense to hack away from.
This may be the phrase of the evening, yes.
Yeah. Let's go to what you called the core of your approach, which is the resurrection of Jesus. Never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true. And so let's dismiss that as something that simply has no evidence whatsoever of any credible
Before we
nature.
dismiss it, let's hear a response from John, because obviously this is an important issue. What counts as evidence and what are the assumptions
and indeed,
we make?
I suppose you would argue that science cannot explain the resurrection.
Well,
I wouldn't quite argue that way. I would say that science cannot forbid a resurrection, because you see, science proceeds on discovering the regularities to which nature works and has done a very impressive job. And the fact that we know that dead bodies don't normally rise, that is a law of nature in that sense, means that we recognize something very special happened, if it did happen. Now, there are two issues here. The first of all, there's the in-principle one, which always ends up in talking about David Hume, who said that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. And I do not believe they are. That's point number one, and I can go into that if you like. Do you want me to?
Do you want to believe? Well, we might as well, since you raised it.
Well, you better define a miracle. I think a miracle is defined as something that is against the laws of nature.
But I don't define it like that at all. A miracle, miraculum in Latin simply means something to be wondered at, but we're talking about something supernatural. Now, it seems to me very clear that when Hume said miracles violate the laws of nature, he was really not understanding. And the great interpreter, Anthony Flew, of David Hume...
No.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think he was going to object to the raising of Anthony Flew.
Oh, well, I'll not raise Anthony
Let's
Flew.
get back to raising
He
Jesus.
has died and hasn't risen. I do, I do see that point. But the point is this. C.S. Lewis long ago told a little analogy. If I stay in a hotel tonight put £100 in a drawer, and do the same tomorrow night, there are £200 in it. 1 + 1 = 2. If on the third morning I find 50 quid, what do I say? That the laws of arithmetic have been broken, or the laws of England? Clearly, I say the laws of England have been broken. How do I know? Because the laws of arithmetic have not been broken. It's our recognizing of what normally happens that helps us to see an exception. Now, if I were claiming that the body of Jesus rose from the dead by processes, natural processes going on in the grave 5 minutes before we happened, yes, that would be wrong. But I'm not claiming that. What Christians claim is that the God that created the universe and built the regularities into it is capable.
Pure speculation.
Well,
Wait a minute. No, this is
not worth listening.
This isn't speculation.
Well, let's listen and then you respond, Peter.
Peter, it's dead easy to say it's not worth listening to. You tempt me to say that about some of the things you say, but I'm not going to do that. Because it seems to me it's very important to listen to what Christianity claims before you judge it. And what is claimed is the God who creates the universe and sustains it is not subject to laws as if they were laws of a land. He set up the regularities and he can feed a new event into them. And the claim is, and with this I finish, that God raised Christ from the dead by an input of colossal power.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, you've got it, Peter, in one.
No, I mean, this
Well,
is...
that is the claim at the end of the day.
But, I mean, this is... everyone knows here that's nonsense. What you're inventing is an agent who can do anything he likes. He or she likes, I suppose you have to say these days. And so it is the laziest way of accounting for observations, sometimes observations that were never actually made. Religious explanations which resort to God did it are intellectually lazy. I won't use a stronger term than that, but I do think that they are lazy because, I mean, what does it mean as an explanation? You lie there saying, oh, God did it, and everyone says, oh, I understand now. Religious explanations are easy to accept by the unthinking. Science is difficult to accept because it involves a lot of thought. You really have to tease out the processes by which an event occurs. You can't simply say, and God did it. You've got to go through, in biology, you delve down into, if you like, the chemistry of the organism. In chemistry, you delve down into the physics of the underlying processes. And I accept maybe in physics, you have to delve down into the underlying mathematical fabric of whatever I mean by that. It's jolly hard work, and you've got to work on it. But it's more satisfying when you get to the end of an explanation than that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying, and abracadabra, God did it. I mean, that is intellectually corrupt.
Let's be clear. Peter Atkins is right to call the resurrection story absurd. Not to be cruel, but because it defies everything we know about biology, medicine, and physics. Once a body dies, decomposition begins within minutes. Cells break down. Organs fail. Brain function is permanently lost. There is zero empirical evidence, none, that a dead human being has ever come back to life after days in a tomb. Lennox tries to dance around this with philosophical wordplay. God isn't breaking the laws of nature, he's just feeding in new events. But that's not an explanation. That's just invoking magic and calling it divine. It's not based on data, observation, or repeatability. It's the same reasoning used for thousands of unverified religious claims throughout history, from Osiris to Krishna to Muhammad's night journey. Belief doesn't make something true. He compares God to a thief overwriting arithmetic in a hotel drawer. But that only proves the point. If the drawer has less money than expected, We assume theft because we have evidence that theft happens. We don't assume magic. That's exactly how science works, by seeking the most plausible, evidence-based explanation. And Lennox's ultimate fallback? That God, who made the rules, can break them. But that's the problem. If you allow supernatural exceptions anytime you hit a difficult question, you're no longer doing reasoning. You're escaping it. It's a shortcut that ends the conversation and replaces inquiry with obedience. Atkins is right. Religious explanations aren't just unhelpful. They're lazy. They shut down investigation. Science, on the other hand, demands proof. It works hard for its answers. And it's brought us everything from antibiotics to spaceflight to the internet you're watching this video on. If belief in miracles had any real explanatory power, it would have produced results by now. It hasn't. So here's the question for you. Do you want answers based on hope or on evidence? If you're tired of "God did it" being used to explain the unknown, hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more thoughtful breakdowns like this. Let's keep asking questions and insisting on real answers.